Welcome back, American Good Friday to you. Matt Continetti is a columnist with the Washington Free Beacon, a contributing editor to Commentary Magazine and Podcast, and a fellow at American Enterprise Institute. Matt joins me most Fridays to look back at the week. Matt, Good Friday to you. How are you?
I'm well, Hugh. Good Friday to you, too.
Thank you. Now, Matt, I go up the implacable hill every day, usually listening to commentary. And you guys dropped the pod late today, noted critique. So instead, I listened to Dan Senor talking to Tal Becker. Tal Becker, for the benefit of the audience, very, very distinguished international lawyer and very prominent, famed Israeli attorney. And they went over the flaws in Israel's Concepcion about Hamas, which rivaled the flaws in the 1973 Concepcion. But they never really explained what it meant. I know what it means. Would you explain what the Concepcion is and why it was so bad in 1973 and again in October of 2024?
Well, this Concepcion, this strategic concept guides the Israeli political and military echelons in their defense. In 1973, the idea was that there would be no direct surprise attack on Israel, and that was, of course, proven wrong by the Arab invasion on Yom Kippur, setting off the Yom Kippur War in 1973. The conception, as I see it 50 years later, was that basically Hamas, left in power in Gaza, could be dealt with, that the real threat was Hezbollah in the north of Israel, but that Hamas was a terrorist state in Gaza, but it could be bought off, and every now and then, if it launched too many rockets into Israel, the Israelis would, as they say, mow the lawn and conduct an air campaign until another ceasefire was reached. That idea that you could handle Hamas and had to worry more about Hezbollah was proven false by the events of October 7th, 2023.
Now, I've always understood it to be, a Concepcion is also an all-encompassing, genuinely and generally agreed upon set of assumptions. So that in 1973, it wasn't just Golda Meir and the IDF that believed that there was no threat from Egypt and Syria that they wouldn't know about. And in October of 2023, it wasn't just Netanyahu, but parties to the left and right agreed that Hamas was not really a threat. So is that, I want people to, it's everybody kind of agrees with something, right?
Yeah, it's buy-in. It's the whole government, the parties, they more or less agree. Now, there are always dissenters, but they tend to be marginal. And there's more, I think, cohesion in the national security, parts of the Israeli government than there are typically, say, in modern-day America. But you're right, Hugh. It's everyone kind of buys into these ideas, which were proven false in 1973 and then again in 2023.
Now, what I want to raise with you in the segments on and off air is where the American Concepcion might be way off. And do you think there is an American Concepcion? Because I do.
Well, I think there was definitely a conception for the Biden administration. That was, I think, defined by de-escalation, the idea that there would be peace if only we gave our adversaries diplomatic off-ramps. And so you wouldn't want to escalate any situation because that might make things more dangerous in Ukraine. It might make things more dangerous in the Middle East with Iran or with the Houthis. And the remarkable event of this week, of course, was that that conception was swept away and a new one is being put in place. We still haven't seen its totality, but we can see the outlines of Donald Trump's America First idea replacing the flawed Biden idea of de-escalation.
And even prior, what I'm going to argue to you, and I'll put the first proposition out before we go to the break, is that one conception that exists is that America does not cancel treaties. And in fact, President Trump has said to Panama, I might simply cancel our treaty. And in fact, the most recent exercise of that was 1977, when Jimmy Carter canceled the defense treaty with Taiwan. Do you think it's part of the American conception that we don't cancel treaties, but that's not always the case?
It's definitely part of the liberal, internationalist, democratic conception. But of course, George W. took us out of the Kyoto Protocol, and Donald Trump took us out of the Paris Climate Accord, not once but twice, most recently this week. And now he's looking at Panama too.
I'm going to talk with Matt about Panama, and when we come back about NATO, it's really important to understand there shouldn't be an American conception. There should be an American realism, and it ought to be cold-eyed and clear. I'll be right back. Short segment with Matt Continetti now. Matt, I was teaching my law students this week. I've been teaching con law since 1995. And I told them about Carter canceling the treaty with Taiwan, and it was news to them. They're kids. They're 22 to 25 years old. Then I told them that, the music. Then I told them that President George H.W. Bush had actually invaded Panama in 1989 to get Noriega. And we'd sent troops. It was bloody. 23 Americans died. Hundreds of Panamanians died. And then we got out. And news to them. Nobody covers that. Is that part of our conception that we just forget stuff that's inconvenient to our ideology?
Well, that's certainly my experience too, Hugh, as a teacher and as a college professor, especially the recent past. I've always thought it was because that most high school history classes just end with the Second World War, if they even get that far, So much of the 20th century is just not covered in high school. And so when they come to college, you have to fill in the gaps. So I agree, forgetting the past 70 years is a widespread national problem. But I will say this as well. We talk about this conception, talk about treaties. Republicans in the 21st century are more, I think, interested in removing ourselves from these treaties that tie us down. But what Donald Trump did do this week is explicitly reject the conception that American borders are static. And that has been a bipartisan idea now for almost 100 years, right? I mean, and so it's remarkable to hear him say again and again and again that under his second term, American territory will expand. And I think the world is just beginning to realize, Hugh, he means it. He means it. He means it in Greenland. He means it in Panama. Maybe he's still kidding on Canada.
He's kidding.
But he just said it again today when he was visiting North Carolina, that Canada will be the 51st state.
It's a good jab, and it makes the Canadians wake up. But he's going to love Pierre Poilievre so much he's going to stop saying that. I do think he wants Greenland for very serious reasons. And I point my liberal friends, in 2014, were you in favor of Scotland holding a referendum on their independence? Shouldn't the Greenlanders have it? They're only 55 to 60,000. And what do you think, Matt? Should they be allowed to have a vote on this?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. I mean, I don't think America should stand still as Greenland is victimized by Danish imperialism. And if the Greenlanders decide that they want to connect with us to become more intertwined with the United States, I think that's a good thing. This is the new great game, Hugh, is the Arctic, because you see how the Arctic can be a base for Russian influence, which we want to prevent. You can see how the Chinese might be interested in Arctic resources and Arctic pathways for their Navy if ever they break through that first island chain. And then, of course, Greenland contains so many natural resources. And America has expressed an interest in acquiring Greenland in the past. So it's definitely, I think, a shock to the system when Trump brings this up. But it is well in tune with historical themes
and with real politics.
Many years.
With real politics. I'll be right back with Matt Continetti. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, America. Matt Continetti is my guest. During the break, we skipped pretty quickly from the president's inaugural address through the Canada expansion and on to Greenland, which will be ours soon. I'm joking. You got to listen to the whole thing on the podcast. Matt, now let's take the analogy. Israel had a very deeply flawed and dangerous conception in 73 and then again in 2023 and hurt them badly. Do we have a flawed conception of NATO in this millennium?
I think that NATO has been a very successful alliance, Hugh. And I think when you compare NATO's record against the record of another post-war institution, the United Nations, it's clear that NATO is much more successful and much more a force for good. I do think, though, that the conception that Europe can free ride on American defense expenditure is terribly flawed. And when you look at the track that Europe has gone down in recent decades in this post-Cold War era, it has been on the decline. It has deindustrialized its economy in the 21st century so that the Europeans are poorer now. We just had a new study out today showing that the youngest Americans, the Gen Z Americans, are flourishing far better than their counterparts in Europe. When you look at how the Green New Deal and regulations have quashed innovation in Europe, and then, of course, you look at how the European welfare states spend almost nothing on defense, that it takes a change agent like Donald Trump to rattle the cages and get them to spend more. I'd say that's the big flaw in the NATO concept, not the idea that there should be an alliance based on certain values that holds Europe secure, Europe the source of the two most devastating wars in human history. But the flaw is that America should be responsible for the defense, and there should be very little proportional contribution from the other member states.
And this is exactly right. I want to expand on that because Poland is carrying its weight. And certainly our allies in Europe sent troops in the aftermath of 9/11 to Afghanistan. Some of them lost their lives. The United Kingdom is carrying its weight. Maybe it needs to do more, but they're carrying their weight. The big dog in the not doing their job category is Germany, Matt. And I really don't know why we should be picking up the tab for Germany. Do you?
Well, a while back, you would say, look at how rich Germany is. We shouldn't be picking up the tab. Now we look and we say, well, look how irresponsible Germany is. Why are we picking up the tab? Because Germany isn't that rich anymore. The economic model they've pursued has run into the shoals. And it's not just a question of kind of leaning too heavily on imports, or rather leaning too heavily on exporting to China. But it's also this Green New Deal madness, which the Germans have always kind of been susceptible to and has really, really harmed their economy. Germany is a problem. It's always been a problem in European history. But the problem now is that its political class has made a series of poor decisions and does not seem ready to accept the role it needs to take in leading European defense and shouldering more of the burden. But now that Trump is in power, I think they're going to be reminded of this again and again and again.
So can we add to our list of clarifications to the conception? Russia is no longer our biggest threat. China is our biggest threat. We need the Quad to be propped up. And by the way, space is not demilitarized, no matter how much we might want it to be. We need Elon Musk and other people with space buses to come up with what we need to counter the Chi-Coms because they're in space. Is that part of our flawed conception that we think space is just, Star Trek-y and their Klingons aren't here yet? And the Klingons are here and they're called Xi Jinping.
Right. Well, you remind me, Hugh, that we left out in our catalog of American neo-manifest destiny, Mars, which got a shout out in the inaugural as well, and led Elon to cheer in the background for posterity. No, space is becoming militarized. We had that news of a potential Russian nuclear space weapon that Mike Turner, when he was head of the House Intelligence Committee, broke to the world last year. I think the conception that's flawed and we should correct is the idea that the bad guys, the Russias, the Chinas, the Irans, and the North Koreas, are all isolated cases. That might have been the case in the past, but what happened under Biden and the collapse of American deterrence under his presidency and the Biden-Harris administration essentially put these four countries together in a bloc. And so when we think about national security in the world, we have to recognize that, yes, Russia is fighting in Ukraine, but China has assisted Russia in many ways. The North Koreans are supplying frontline troops fighting in Russia in that Kursk salient there against Ukraine. And the Iranians, of course, have been supplying the drones to Russia, as well as funding these proxies, which were causing so much damage and terrorism until Israel finally began to take action against them last year.
Excellent addition. The conception has to change. It is an alliance of evil, bad people, not, what did you say, isolated cases. I love that. I'm going to use that. I will credit you occasionally. But I also want to steal something from commentary. Our friend Tom Cotton, and he really is our friend, he came to D.C. before Donald Trump did. He's very cold-eyed and realistic about the world. Are there others that you can point to? I think Donald Trump might be as well. I think maybe Rubio is. What do you? I know Mike Waltz is. What do you think?
Waltz, Rubio, Stefanik, I think, is younger than Cotton, but she really has become a star on national security. Tom Cotton is a serious person, and he also has a kind of spine to him. He's very conservative, but he knows how to frame arguments in ways that resound in common sense terms. And I think that's why he's such an influential part outside the White House, outside the administration in this new era. Is that
I certainly hope he calls up the president and says, put the Secret Service back on Secretary Pompeo, Brian Hook, and everybody else who's under threat from Iran. Stand by, Matt. I've got a couple more questions about the conception in American politics that have just got to change. I'll be right back. 2 segments left with Matt Continetti. Matt, when we're talking about the American conception, I always worry that we have a conception that our arsenal is so big it doesn't need to be bigger, and our ships are better than the Chinese ships, so they don't have to be as numerous. Do you think reality is coming to D.C. about our military unpreparedness at this moment?
Well, President Trump has said many times that he wants to build ships. He told you that, Hugh, in a recent interview. I think he understands that our Navy is too small. And I think there are certainly members of Congress, we spoke about a few of them in an earlier segment, who also agree that the defense expenditure of the United States is not up to the task. It's interesting. Trump recently has been calling for NATO members to increase their defense expenditure to 5% of their economy. That would be a huge increase for the Europeans and a necessary one, but it would also be an increase for us if we were to do that as well. So we are not the only, the Europeans are not the only countries who have let their defense go to waste. And I'd also say, Hugh, we've reached this very dangerous moment where our debt service is now higher than our annual defense budget. And as the historian Neil Ferguson points out, when that has happened to great powers in the past, it set them on the road to decline. So if President Trump is correct and American decline ended this week, that would mean that we need to spend more on defense, and we need to get that debt and the cost of servicing the debt lower than what we're spending on protecting Americans.
Matt, I've got 3 quick revenue questions for you. I'll put them on the table now, and we'll talk about them after the break. We may have to drag you for 4 extra minutes. I want to tax every gambling transaction in the United States because it's bad. It's going to produce a generation of gambling addicts, and the federal government gets nothing out of it. Number 2, I want to tax every dope. Dope is legal everywhere now, not everywhere, but pretty close to everywhere. We ought to have a federal tax on that, excise tax, and preempt the states because they've screwed it up. And then finally, there are trillions in 401k and IRAs that if we gave a 10% one-time tax on their transfer to Roth, we would reap a gazillion dollars. The present discounted value of the retirement benefits eventually taxed is probably equal to what we'd get immediately. So after the break, I'm going to ask you about each of those 3 things. I'm coming right back with Matt Continetti. Don't go anywhere, America. Back with Matt Continetti of the an American Enterprise Institute and Commentary Magazine. Matt, during the break, I said I want to tax gambling, every single transaction that's done online. I want to tax dope sales everywhere for the feds, and I want a one-time conversion of IRA and 401ks to Roth IRAs, tax at 10%. What do you think?
I think they're all great ideas. I'm a old-fashioned social conservative, so I would rather we restrict gambling much more than it is allowed today. And I would rather we make marijuana much harder to get and to use than it is today. But if we are going to kind of persist in the current ways that we deal with both gambling and marijuana, I see no reason why we shouldn't impose pretty heavy taxes on them. This has been done before with alcohol and with cigarettes, so it makes sense that you would do it with other vices such as gambling and marijuana. And then on the IRA transfer, that's a great idea. Kind of be a boost of money. I would say I would add to it. We can make some money off selling federal land. This is an idea that Thomas Sowell has proposed. And I think America's greatest days have been when we're selling land to Americans and giving them the opportunity. It would probably lower real estate prices as well. And then also an idea that just came out from our friend Stephen Moore today was let's auction off some of the EM spectrum. The government owns a huge amount of the spectrum. You can make a lot of money off of that because the spectrum is very valuable. So I think there are creative ways to raise revenues here. And let's not forget, the endowment tax on these huge hedge funds like universities that have been these dens of iniquity and villainy and anti-Semitism. There are creative ways to raise revenue.
You anticipated my penultimate question. I love Trump's EO on DEI. It's actually an EO on restoring constitutional order to the United States, where we are not to inflict penalties or award benefits on the basis of race, color, creed, ethnicity. Did you applaud that EO?
Oh, I was just saying before we went on that I think it was probably the most important executive order that he issued out of all the ones, this flurry of activity, Hugh, because it restores the American promise. And I think it was appropriate that he did it on Martin Luther King Day, making sure that Americans are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. That is the American dream. And so it's very important that we spend these next 4 years taking apart this DEI structure that's been so corrosive to freedom and to excellence. And also, though, we need to make this stuff last. And I think that will require congressional action down the road as well.
I have one more question for Matt Continetti about the second most controversial man on the planet right now, and that is Bibi Netanyahu. But you're going to have to listen to the podcast or go to the YouTube channel to get it, because I'm out of time on this hour of the Hugh Show. Don't go anywhere. Ben Domenech starts off the next hour. Welcome back for my last question for Matt Continetti this week. And Matt, I asked Ruthie Bloom this yesterday. I discovered Ruthie by virtue of the commentary podcast, which is my daily. As long as you guys get it done early enough, I get to listen to it when I exercise. I asked Ruthie about Bibi Netanyahu and how he's waged the war and whether or not he can win election. He said, it's my earnest and fervent hope that he continues the end of his term and decides not to run again. And then we talked about the fact he's been sort of a genius in the waging of this war. Churchill. This is the 60th anniversary, by the way, of Churchill's death. The first thing you see when you walk into Westminster Cathedral is a slab that says, remember Winston Churchill, so I will with you and I will with Ben coming up. What is your assessment of Prime Minister Netanyahu's performance since 10/7 and his political future?
Well, he is a Churchillian figure. I mean, Israel's longest serving prime minister, someone who has gone through so many American administrations and learned to deal with them. He was dealt a grievous blow on October 7th, and I do think that Israel's just beginning the process of trying to figure out what went wrong and to hold the people accountable for what went wrong. But I think that Netanyahu's performance during the war has restored his prestige among the Israeli public and certainly on the world stage. In that neighborhood, Hugh, the Middle East, you have to be strong. You have to show strength, or else all your enemies will seize their opportunities. That's what Netanyahu did last year. And so I think that has helped Israel, and I think it's helped his political career. The question is, for me, what will happen with the rest of this ceasefire? Will Israel recover as many hostages as it can? Will it last? And then, if, as I believe is likely, it will collapse eventually, what next? How does Netanyahu handle that challenge? We don't know the answer to that question, but we do know he is one very clever and creative and strong figure. And so I think he'll do the right thing.
Matt Continetti, I appreciate the extra time. A blessed Shabbat to you and your family, and I will talk to you next Friday. Hope you enjoy the new hour here on the afternoon shift of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thank you, Matt.